Most people don't realize the exact moment their status drops. There's no argument, no public humiliation, no obvious turning point. It happens in smaller ways. Someone interrupts you and doesn't correct themselves. You say no, and they negotiate like it's optional. You set a boundary, and it gets tested again. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet recalculation. And once someone recalculates your position, they don't need to attack you. They just adjust around you. They interrupt more comfortably. They push more confidently. They assume more flexibility. Not because they decided to disrespect you, because your signals made it safe. When someone feels safe pushing you, they don't escalate. They adjust. That adjustment is the downgrade. Not loud, not public, just structural. And once that structural downgrade happens, your position doesn't collapse, it lowers. Quietly. Today, we're breaking down the 5 signals that cause that shift, so you can remove instability before your position gets quietly reclassified. And here's what makes it dangerous. Once people reclassify you, they don't announce it. They adjust to it. They speak to you differently. They challenge you differently. They expect less resistance from you. And over time, that becomes your new normal. That's how status erosion works. Not loudly, quietly. To understand how this happens, you have to understand something about human perception. People don't consciously decide who to respect. They calculate it, not with logic, with pattern recognition. Your brain is constantly scanning for stability. Is this person firm? Are they reactive? Do they stand by what they say? Do their boundaries move under pressure? Every small interaction feeds that calculation. And here's the part that most people miss. Respect isn't granted because someone likes you. It's granted because your behavior feels structurally stable. When your signals show consistency, people categorize you as solid. When your signals show flexibility under pressure, they categorize you as negotiable. That categorization is subtle but powerful. Because once someone labels you as negotiable, they begin testing you differently. They push slightly harder, they interrupt slightly sooner, they debate slightly longer, not to attack you, but to confirm the model they're building. And if the model keeps confirming that your position shifts under pressure, the downgrade stops being temporary. It becomes structural. This isn't about dominance, it's about predictability. Stable signals create status stability. Unstable signals invite recalibration. And most people are unknowingly sending recalibration signals every single day. That's what we're about to break down. Signal number 1 is over-explaining minor decisions, not major life choices. Minor ones. Why you chose that restaurant. Why you structured that email a certain way. Why you handled something the way you did. You don't think you're lowering your status, you think you're being clear. But what you're actually signaling is preemptive defense. And preemptive defense only happens when someone believes their position might not hold. High-status communication assumes legitimacy. It does not rush to justify it. When someone with stable positioning makes a choice, they state it calmly. They don't immediately supply supporting evidence. But when you begin explaining before anyone questions you, you subtly communicate that your decisions require validation. And validation seeking is interpreted as structural softness. People don't consciously label you insecure. They simply adjust. They question you more often. They feel more comfortable disagreeing. They interrupt your reasoning sooner. They push back with less hesitation. Because you've trained them to believe your position is negotiable. And here's the deeper problem. Once people expect you to defend your decisions, you start anticipating their doubt. You explain more, they question more. The cycle feeds itself. Eventually, you're no longer seen as the person who decides. You're seen as the person who convinces. And convincing is a lower status role than deciding. That's how small explanations quietly turn into structural downgrade. Signal number 2 is constant availability. Always responding immediately. Always answering the call. Always saying yes without pause. On the surface, it looks polite, reliable, responsible. But socially constant availability sends a different message. It signals surplus, and surplus lowers perceived value. When someone can access you instantly, without delay, without scheduling, without friction, your time feels negotiable. And negotiable time signals negotiable positioning. High-status individuals don't make themselves unreachable, but they do make themselves structured. Their time has edges, it has shape, it has limits. When you respond instantly to everything, you remove that structure. You teach people that your attention is adjustable. And adjustable attention becomes interruptible attention. Interruptible attention becomes deprioritized attention. People begin reaching for you without checking timing. They assume you'll accommodate. They assume you'll shift. They assume you'll adjust. An assumption is hierarchy. When someone assumes you will move for them, they subconsciously place themselves slightly above you in the dynamic. Not dramatically, just enough to tilt it. Over time, that tilt compounds. Meetings get scheduled around them, not you. Conversations shift toward their urgency, not yours. You become responsive instead of directive. This isn't about playing games. It's about managing signal. Delayed response isn't rudeness. It's structural framing. When your time has gravity, but people orbit it differently. When it has none, they step over it. Constant availability quietly invites downgrade. Signal number 3 is softening your own statements before anyone challenges them. Phrases like, I might be wrong, but this could just be me, but maybe it's nothing, but I'm not sure, but you think you're being humble, but what you're actually doing is lowering your own authority before anyone else has the chance to. Language frames hierarchy. When you weaken your statement before it's evaluated, you invite others to treat it as optional. And optional positioning receives optional respect. Confident communication isn't loud, it's stable. Stable language sounds like, this is what I see. This is the direction. This is the decision. There's no aggression in it, just structural firmness. But when every idea you offer is wrapped in disclaimers, you subtly communicate that your position might collapse under pressure. People respond to that signal automatically. They interrupt more easily, they debate more freely, they override more quickly. Not because your ideas lack merit, but because you presented them as negotiable from the start. And here's where it compounds. Once people get used to overriding you, they stop asking for your full reasoning. They assume your stance can be adjusted. You shift from being the person who defines direction to the person who proposes suggestions. Suggestions compete, direction leads, small phrases, minor softeners. But repeated over time, they move you from directive to adjustable. And adjustable positioning quietly lowers status. Signal number 4 is reacting too strongly to small social tests. Someone makes a light joke at your expense. Someone challenges your idea in front of others. Someone slightly pushes a boundary. And your reaction is immediate. You defend, you overexplain, you raise your tone, you show visible irritation. The issue isn't emotion, it's disproportional response. In social dynamics, minor tests are normal. People test stability the way they test the strength of a structure. They apply small pressure, they watch what happens. If the structure barely moves, they categorize it as stable. If the structure shakes visibly, they categorize it as flexible. When your reaction spikes under small pressure, the people register that spike as leverage. They learn that minimal challenge produces noticeable effect, and noticeable effect invites repetition. Not always intentionally, often automatically. Once someone senses that your emotional equilibrium shifts easily, they feel safer pushing again. You become predictable under pressure. Predictable reactions reduce perceived stability. And perceived stability is one of the foundations of status. High-status individuals don't ignore tests. They calibrate. They respond proportionally. They don't turn small friction into dramatic moments. When your reactions consistently exceed the size of the challenge, you teach people that your positioning can be moved with very little force. And once that lesson is learned, downgrade follows quietly, and here's the long-term effect. People begin choosing you as the person to test, but because you respond. Over time, that pattern isolates you into a different category. You're no longer seen as stable, you're seen as reactive. And reactive positioning is easier to override. Signal number 5 is explaining your boundaries instead of stating them. When someone crosses a line, you don't simply say, "That's not acceptable." You explain why it's not acceptable. You give context. You justify your discomfort. You try to make them understand your reasoning, but boundaries lose structural strength the moment they require persuasion. A boundary is not an argument. It's a limit. When you present it as something that needs agreement, you subtly communicate that the line might move. And moving lines invite pressure. Once someone senses that your limit can be discussed, they begin treating it as adjustable. They test how far it bends. They measure your tone. They watch your hesitation. They look for enforcement. And if enforcement feels uncertain, the boundary stops functioning as a boundary. It becomes a suggestion. High-status boundaries are simple. This doesn't work for me. That's not happening. No. No extended justification. No emotional escalation. No debate. Because persuasion belongs to negotiation, and negotiation lowers positioning. The moment your boundary turns into a conversation, you've shifted from defining the line to defending the line, and defending is structurally weaker than defining. Over time, people stop asking whether they can cross your boundary. They assume they can negotiate it. And once your limits become negotiable, your status becomes adjustable. That's how soft boundaries quietly trigger full reclassification. And once people learn that your limits move under explanation, they stop treating them as limits at all. They treat them as starting points. And when your limits become starting points, your positioning drops without anyone announcing it. That's the final stage of downgrade. Here's what connects all 5 signals. None of them are dramatic. None of them are aggressive. None of them make you look obviously weak. They introduce instability. And instability invites recalculation. You don't lose status because someone decides to disrespect you. You lose it because your signals allow reclassification. Overexplaining, instant availability, softened language, overreaction, negotiated boundaries. Individually, they feel harmless. Repeated, they shift your category. And once someone reclassifies you, they interact with you differently. Not louder, not meaner, just lower. They interrupt more comfortably, they negotiate more confidently, they assume more flexibility. An assumption quietly becomes hierarchy. The solution isn't dominance, it isn't volume, it isn't confrontation, it's structural consistency. You don't gain status by performing strength. You protect it by removing instability. When your signals remain steady under pressure, people stop probing. When they stop probing, recalculation slows. And when recalculation slows, your position stabilizes. That's how you move from negotiable back to solid, quietly, without proving yourself, without defending every move, just controlled signal. And once you understand that status is inferred, not declared, you stop chasing respect, you start engineering stability. Because stability is what people ultimately rank above all else. But stability doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes slowly. Most people don't lose status because of one big mistake. They lose it because small signals repeat long enough to become their new normal. If you've ever wondered how disrespect quietly becomes permanent without you noticing, that's where the real shift begins. Downgrade isn't loud, it's gradual, and gradual shifts are the hardest to notice. Until you look up and realize the downgrade already happened.